All right, get around, figure transformations. What I want to talk about is fear factor. What is fear factor? Fear factor is when somebody is worried something's going to happen, regardless if it happens or not. And what's happening is we tense when we fear something is going to happen, regardless whether it happens or not. Unfortunately, when it does happen, when we're in that kind of heightened sense of awareness, it's worse. And we kind of carry that into us when we exercise all too often. And that's what I used to kind of train clients for, and I still do, is to try and get rid of that fear factor, get them more comfortable and confident. Because if you're confident in doing something, you're not going to fear it, and you're more likely to succeed at it. So, one example would be a push-up. Okay, people tense because they're worried about if they get down there, they might not be able to get back up. Now, we can do different things, like I tend to make the movement pattern easier for people so they can work on the mechanics at an easier level, giving them the confidence. Because all too often, if you put them down in the push-up position and they're not capable of doing it, the thing that people don't want to do is fail. Okay, so what they do is they find any way that they can to make that happen. Now, while they may get stronger in some sense, they're also creating scar tissue, and they're creating bad movement patterns. So we want to make sure that somebody's moving well before we start advancing them on to kind of more advanced techniques or harder movement patterns. And we need to kind of work through those angles and understand if somebody can't do it because they're too tight, or maybe they're too scared to find something different. So again, an example would be maybe balance training, okay? Something simple. Instead of maybe doing a step up, just getting them to balance and stabilize. Okay, but again, a lot of times too, we're not realizing our tightness also gives us that fear factor. So if I'm too tight and I'm trying to attempt a push-up, I'm not going to be able to go down all the way because my muscles just won't allow it, because my shoulders are too tight and I don't have enough of support and movement through it. So again, that's where I would start with somebody higher. And that's why I'm going to start recording all my clients to make sure that they can see what they're doing. And hopefully sometimes seeing that and seeing maybe they're more capable of something will start to kind of help them get through that fear factor. But again, the fear factor is based on tightness. And if we can start using kind of percussion therapy to better get that movement. I just had a gentleman here that was trying to do an overhead tricep extension. I could see that the pain was coming from his shoulder and he couldn't get back into there. So what I did was kind of loosen up the back of his arm. All of a sudden he's got a bigger range of motion. Now he's not fearful of going back further. He's also not in pain. And again, I think a lot of times too, when people are training, they don't like to admit that they may feel discomfort or pain. Now some people are really vocal about it. And that's what kind of way you got to understand your client, and understanding what they will tell you and what they won't tell you. And a lot of times, again, people don't want to fail, so they're not. And then you have some people that are just scared of doing it, and they'll tell you straight up. But we got to start to understand that our lack of flexibility really is what creates that fear factor the most, and our tensing. So the more that we can start to get over our tensing and start to loosen up tissue, so like maybe again I'm doing a push-up, and the client doesn't want to come down, they're doing something like this. It's because, again, they're so tight in their shoulders that they can't elicit a good, happy, healthy movement, because their shoulders, I mean, there's so much going on with the upper body in order to make, honestly, a push-up. Now, if you're young enough, yeah, you can kind of force that into, when you're 20s and you kind of start getting people to move better. You get somebody in the 30s and 40s and it's really hard. And I notice that with a lot of clients that it's hard to teach kind of push-ups later on in life. And I used to just think too, like a lot of people, it was strength. And now I'm realizing it's tightness that's holding them back. And once we start understanding that it's our tightness, then we can start to approach exercise in a different pattern. So I guess the big thing is to kind of ask yourself when you're doing something, what is it that makes you afraid of it? If you're walking out in the woods, is it that you're afraid of twisting your ankle? Well, that's coming from the hip, okay? Our hip is gonna, I know from my own experience that I thought it was my calf for years, and my ankle was weak. But my ankle's weak because I don't have a good angle with my hip, because my hip is too tight. So if I loosen my hip, I can get better, more comfortable and less fear of injuring my ankle when playing a sport or kind of walking outdoors or whatever. Upper body, okay? Now maybe I'm fearful of bringing my shoulders, arms overhead, or I'm twisting, okay? A lot of times I used to stay away from those things because I didn't understand them enough. Now thankfully I do understand kind of what's happening and how we can start to reduce that fear factor of somebody twisting. Again, you gotta get rid of those, you gotta get the tightness in the hips. If I'm tight here, now I gotta move from my lumbar too much. And that's most likely what's gonna experience a pinch or a pull in the vertebrae, or a dislocation, whatever you wanna call it. I gotta fix my hips if I'm thinking of fixing somebody's kind of rotational pattern movements, because again, rotation happens in the hips, and if I can't move well enough in the hips, then I'm going to start torquing through my spine. So the more we understand the fear factor and kind of what we can do to help it, the better off we're all going to be. If we found this helpful, kind of watch some of the other videos in terms of kind of the percussion therapy. That is what's going to help get rid of that fear factor and mixed in with some good movement patterns. The more you do something, the more you become comfortable with it. And we also need to just be more flexible and pliable, both mentally and physically, to start to achieve these goals. Thank you.